Some 10 minutes when you can ask questions of our panellists.
Try and get Jane.
We'll try and get Jane Morgan from Brisbane connected. So someone, is it Anna, going to go around with the microphone? Or Kathy? Have you got one with you? If you're going to ask a question, put your hand up and someone will come to the microphone.
Try again.
We'll start going while you're doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, who's first?
Looks like it's not going to work.
He's sorry about the Brisbane connection. Technology's let us down at the 11th hour.
I think it's yesterday. Cool.
Okay, anyone start the ball rolling?
Question, Peter, Lynette May. This is to Andrew. Sorry. Oh, okay. Lynette May from Disability Employment Australia. I'd like to commend you on the afternoon. It's great to hear these such fabulous and successful stories, so thank you. But I have this burning question. So Andrew, if I look at the statistics in disability employment services and we look at the participation rates, it puzzles me that sensory impaired people have such small numbers who are active in the program. And I have this question, is that reflective of the demographics in the broader community? Or what's the reason? Do they not need the support of disability, or they're not getting in the door? We're actually not successfully attracting them into the program.
I don't have a definite answer there for you, I apologise. Deaf people in disability employment services, these are only anecdotes, okay? They don't organise, one, interpreters. They expect deaf people to write and communicate that way. So there's huge barriers there. And their perception of their skills is very low. There are a few people who are voluntary participants in these disability organisations, but they're not really feeling confident that they can actually work in the workplace because of their Auslan skills. And particularly in regional areas, because they don't have access to enough interpreters. So it's a knockdown effect.
We must talk.
I might comment on that one too.
We will.
Do I need to come
Yeah,
to this?
and I'll hand you this.
Oh, you can take it off. Thanks, Peter. I might just comment on that. I just think the needs, and I'm talking about people who are blind and have low vision, it's sort of the other major group of people with sensory disability. I just think the needs are so different for deaf people and for people who are blind or have low vision. And I don't think, my sense is anecdotally, that the employment services don't cater for those different needs very well. And I think that people, I can't speak for deaf people in the way that Andrew can, but for low vision, I think they'd be far more likely to go to a blindness specific agency for that sort of support and for lots of other supports, and I think that's why.
Okay, thanks.
I actually had the exact example of that when I was made redundant. I was part of 2 DESs, and when I needed a workplace adjustment, which was around adaptive technology, they did not have a clue. They in fact said to me, we'll have to subcontract Vision Australia to meet your needs. I said, why should I bother continuing to be registered with your agency? I'll just switch to them. You know, so as Graham said, that's it in a nutshell, I think.
and that makes sense to me. I can understand that, but if we're going to add support to people across Australia in regional areas, it's something we need to try to grapple with.
Yeah.
For any specialty.
I'm from a regional DES provider, and I have to say that the linking with VicDef and with Vision Australia in that area, which is Ballarat, is fantastic. So if that provider utilises those services, they can achieve whatever they need to achieve for those clients. The VicDef for us has meant we've got clients that have just walked in our office and they haven't even been linked in with VicDef, and so we've had to do that. But also VicDef feel confident, that we are able to provide them with that assistance. And the adaptive technology that was spoken about just before, I've got 2 clients that are in the water organisation, and we've had to get CCTV and all that sort of stuff. The provider has to ask the question and they have to figure out how to do it. And if we have that limited success, then we're able to provide that to everybody, and the word of mouth is so huge in that area. I think the secret is partnership.
Yeah.
If DES are providing a partnership with a service like Vision Australia, the Deaf Society, VicDef, it will succeed. It'll work much better. You could have a video link, for example, if there's no access to interpreters. So there are other avenues. You just need to work smarter.
We'll just have this conversation. One of the concepts that I have, and it is about partnerships, it's recognising that we're never going to have enough resources to have specialists as distributed as we need them to establish centres of excellence, and for the government to be providing some additional funding to those specialist DESers to be able to provide some on-call help, video linking, education and so forth around the specialist service that you're providing, and then the generalists lift their capability. And they've got to go too.
Jessica Zammit from Blind Citizens Australia. Sorry, Jessica Zammit from Blind Citizens Australia. I just wanted to echo some of the comments that have been made by the speakers regarding reasonable adjustments. One of the biggest frustrations for people who are blind or vision impaired when viewing their eligibility to apply for a position is the quote-unquote inherent licence. This is extraordinarily frustrating because it's very unclear and can immediately put a person off from applying for a job when it's not clear how much work-related travel may be needed, but more to the point, it's not even clear whether any other reasonable adjustments would be considered around how to conduct that work without getting a driver's licence. Obviously that precludes so many people from a job, and it is such a major issue across the board, whether it be government, whether it be not-for-profit, whether it even be the I'm aware of a number of individuals who have looked for positions in the disability sector where a driver's licence is required, and so that in of itself is something that we need to be extraordinarily mindful of about trying to remove that discriminatory requirement where it's not required.
Peter, I might comment on that. I mean, I think Jessica makes a very valid point. There have been numerous DDA complaints successfully challenging that requirement. It's one of those classic generalisations that employers put in job ads sort of almost without thinking about it, and when you analyse it, they're just there isn't the need for a driver's licence, or there's a reasonable adjustment that can address it. So I would encourage people who see that as a requirement rather than just walking away from the jobs, but that doesn't remove the responsibility of employers to really turn their minds. So what are the actual inherent requirements of this job?
Peter, I might just continue on there after Graham regarding the ACT government. And that's one of the things that we're looking at with the regional adjustment policy, and has been mentioned previously, is around that's where our cultural change needs to come in. There needs to be the cultural change at that manager and supervisor's level around the inherent requirements of the job, and actually job redesign so that if there is a position that requires some travel, for that particular task be removed from that job description and handed to somebody else in the team, so that people who mightn't necessarily be able to perform that task but meet the other inherent requirements of the job can actually successfully compete and take that role.
I guess just as a secondary comment, by having that provision in either the role description or in the ad, it actually forces the person to disclose, even if they don't want to disclose their disability. So, you know, as I mentioned, it can put someone off from applying just because they may not need any other adjustments, but if they go to an interview or apply for the job and don't address it, then it may be seen that they're not completing the application correctly, or it then may force them to actually admit why they don't have a driver's licence. And it may not be disability related, but if it is, it's a really precarious position.
It does, that's right. And that's one of the other things that around reasonable adjustment, and one of the things I've been sort of indicating in the ACT, particularly at universities and that sort of thing, with students, is around disclosure and reasonable adjustment. And the way I looked at it in a heated discussion at University of Canberra a few weeks back was around disclosure, where I had somebody who said you should never ever ever disclose because it will always go against you, and a younger student who said, well, I don't care, it's who I am, and sort of brought home that the reasonable disclosure is about you, because disclosure is about gaining access to reasonable adjustment so you can participate in work and in your life and in the community. So that's kind of the perspective we're looking at reasonable adjustment and disclosure at now.
Thank you. I'm Monica from the Workplace Learning Unit out in the northeastern area of Melbourne. I'd like to say a particular thank you to the people that are supporting students with disabilities in work experience, structured workplace learning and school-based apprenticeships. And I'd like to know from Justin, on a practical level, how do corporations connect with schools, with the students with disabilities? Is it in particular, for example, special education environments or mainstream environments? Are there partnership brokers involved? Could you give me some advice on how I can support those students with disabilities?
That's something that in the ACT, I suppose that's one of the reasons why I'm doing the job I'm doing. I've actually come from a local community partnership that managed school-based apprenticeships and vocational, have linkages with the DES service providers and with the schools and learning units and those sort of things. But that would be my suggestion, was get in touch with your local DES providers, with your vocational education coordinators and things like that in the colleges and high schools and things, and do it from that perspective.
Fantastic, thank you.
My name is Gonalai Sprink, working with a university, and we've talked about workplace modifications and reasonable adjustment. One strategy often used overseas, especially in USA, is to look at government purchasing and ICT. So there's inclusive strategies, so that there is hardware and software and computer and telephone equipment that is accessible right from the start. So when a person with a disability in the public service is looking for work, it is much more streamlined. And I know that this approach has been advocated for in Australia, but I'm wondering, say from the ACT government, and I was hoping to ask the Brisbane City Council the same question, is that something that you may as another lever to assist in inclusive practices in employment?
There's a couple of things we're doing along those lines at the moment. We have a lot of shared services in the ACT now, and that will be becoming more and more prevalent now that we're one ACT public service. So we have what we call Intact, which is basically whole of government IT services. And we are in discussions and looking at doing those sort of things now, so that they have access to things like Dragon, Naturally Speaking, and any other software and things, so that it can be very quickly and easily loaded onto any computer where it may be needed. And that's potentially also looking at things through procurement, in terms of one of the other issues we've had is with a gentleman who
uses a wheelchair, not being able to use the photocopier on the floor he works on because he can't see the screen. So one of the things we're looking at now is talking to procurement and finance and those sort of areas across all the directorates to suggest that when they tender services now, that it includes accessible technology in terms of you can get photocopiers that the screen drops up and then drops down so people can see it.
Thank you very much, that's very
I
encouraging.
think we've got time for only one more question, so make this the last.
This is for Graham. My name is Mark Glasgow. I'm a career counsellor. My question is more around your positive discrimination and trying to persuade large companies to take on more disabled employees. My things like tax or forcing targets and giving tax rebates. I'm sure this has been talked about, but out of interest, what do you think? Would it work?
It could, and it is something that's been talked about by some of us, but not to any level of detail. The New South Wales government gives payroll tax exemptions to organisations that are employing people with disability. And that came in a couple of years ago, but I don't know of any other government that's doing it. And I think my position on it is, look, we're so far behind that we need to be looking at all of these sorts of options. So I think, yeah, tax incentives can certainly work to drive markets. There's no doubt about that.
Next to just before I get David Sullivan up, our committee member, to give a vote of thanks. I've got a couple of things just to round off this fantastic forum. One of the things that we do, ADDE, I mentioned, is systemic advocacy. And there's some things here I just wanted to quickly mention. One is around setting of targets. And it's certainly been mentioned here today a few times that that in place for a lot of organisations starting on the journey. And measurement, you can't manage what you don't measure, is a good philosophy. People measure all sorts of things in their organisations, but this one is often not one that management are willing to do. Social procurement, I think one of our questioners talked about that. There's a huge opportunity out there for organisations in social procurement, in, for instance, disability consultancies, and why not say organisations with people who employ people with disabilities will get preferred status, because not everybody wants to be employed, are better off self-employed or having their own consultancies or small businesses, and that's something organisations should give a lot more attention to. Training is another issue. It's incredibly disheartening when you've got Justin has to go, so good, safe trip home, Justin. Pity you didn't get a cuppa.
I'm sorry everybody, I've got to rush back to the airport to get back to Canberra tonight, so I've got some of my business cards up here, so if anybody has to contact me via phone or email, please feel free to grab one, and I look forward to seeing you all again and speaking to you in the future.
Let's speak on. Just like you to have that take link, please.
Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt everybody.
So training, there's a huge number of training courses out there, universities, TAFEs, RTOs, for-profit and not-for-profit training companies teaching and training around disability. And how many of the people doing the training or delivering that training are people with disabilities? There needs to be something done about that. And the last thing on my list is politicians. Let's start with politicians advocating that they lead from the front by employing people, officers. Politicians come and go, the bureaucracy stays the same, and most of the things stay the same, so let's have some leadership there. The other thing quickly mention is that There's no such thing as a free lunch or free afternoon tea as today. So it's beholden on everybody here to do something about this in their own workplaces, take up some of these advocacy causes, and there's a few ways that ADDE may be able to assist you in that process. So before I hand over to David for his vote of thanks. Just before David comes up, he's a member of our committee, long-standing since we started. He's worked as a senior manager in HR, and he's also president of People with MS Australia. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Peter. Good afternoon. Yes, I don't want to keep you too long. I know you're desperate to get to the teas and coffees and so on next door, which we'll arrange in just a split second. But I just wanted to say that this has been an extraordinary occasion, I think, and very well worthwhile from every point of view, as far as I can tell. In particular, I'd like to especially introduce Graham for introducing it the way he did by showing us this thing about positive discrimination and the possibility of reasonable adjustments to make things possible. And those are elements which we may not have been taking too seriously in the past, I'm not sure. That's certainly a very big positive move though, a great opportunity. Of course we had Justin talking about how things go in ACT, and that's been a very interesting exercise, I think. Again, public service, but also people carrying the thing the way they wanted it within a particular state organisation. I'm sure that must have been a very big local management job, and it's taken a great deal of time and effort, I would say, to put into place. But a terrific example. I was delighted also to hear from Phil talking about the PRA, which first I thought might have been Petroleum Refineries of Arizona, the question in Melbourne somewhere, but also it was psychological rehabilitation, which seems to have been extraordinary in terms of employing a very large quantity of their working group, if you like, to show that the product meant to be a consumer. And the 50% level is really something to be proud of. And finally, the question of the Deaf Society in New South Wales, which similarly is a disability that most of us don't take so much notice of as vision disability with sight disability. But again, it's something which we probably take a little bit for granted in the past, but on the other hand, they've really taken it on when they got to the stage of 50% being employed, which is a huge rating by any stretch of the imagination. And again, it shows you what can be done with the right circumstances. And that's why we think this particular occasion has been worth performing as we have. And we're very glad to see such a big number of people here. I hope these messages can go out there, and as Andrea was saying, this is not just a question of localised, because it's now out of the public sector, it's also being offered to people like, they're talking Big W and bits like that. But really does mean something, the shape of the future, so it shows what can be done. So it's an opportunity for all of us to pick this up and move forward with the training and supervision and the other steps we will need to take in order to carry this through. I hope you've enjoyed the time here and it's been worthwhile. We've very much enjoyed having you here. It's been a great opportunity to do it in this particular spot. I hope we can do that again. But thank you so much for coming. Good night.
Time for tea.
Indeed.
Challenge, all those speakers are from interstate, so how about Victoria taking up the challenge? Seeing if we can lift our game and rival some of these great employment stories in other states.